The following content is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition.
Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Therapy Podcast. I'm Julian Schroeder.
And I'm JC Rader.
And we're both licensed professional counselors and registered yoga teachers at White Rock Counseling here in Dallas, and also offer online services to the Right Fit clients. But we are so excited that you're tuning in with us today as we share tips, stories, and inspiration for your overall emotional well-being and everyday therapy life.
Yeah. And you can also rate and review us on iTunes, and it would mean so much to us. We really appreciate all of your feedback. So thank you for doing that for us. And we're excited to announce that we have a sponsor.
What?
Well, that's
Official.
a big deal.
Right?
Yeah. And we really love them and dig them as a company and what they're doing. So we're excited to share with you guys a little bit about that. So they are Therapy Space. You can find them at therapyspace.com. Therapy Spaces.
There's multiple options.
Therapyspace.org.
Oh, thank you, Ziggy. Thank you. We're working on our sponsorship here. But they are super amazing. They have really hip, cool offices that mental health professionals can rent out by the hour, for the month.
So super flexible for whether or not you're starting off or more established and transitioning versus the traditional lease agreement, which is so helpful, right? Because I think we're always growing and evolving. And
we did the math, and it's super affordable.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
It's better than what we're paying where we currently are. Yeah. So that's a plus too.
Yeah. And, like you were saying, JC, the space is just really awesome, really contemporary, calm, and their waiting room, really quiet and serene, has the trickling water, right?
Yeah, and coffee and tea.
Oh my gosh, I
stock
gotta love
up
that.
while you're in there.
Yeah.
So we're excited to be sponsoring, or them being sponsoring us. Yes, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Because if we can help therapists, make it easy for them to do their work, then we're helping others, and reaching more.
And it's created by therapists. So, and I love their tag, therapist, created by therapists for therapists. So they get it. They get what it's like starting your own private practice or renting space or all of the ins and outs of therapy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So
thank you, Therapy Spaces.
Yeah, thank you. Check them out, and we'll be posting some of their stuff on our Instagram too, because they have really beautiful spaces. But we are talking about grief today. Such a deep topic, and it can mean so many different things to so many different people. And I'm excited to talk about this topic because I have personal experience with the death side of grief. And that's how I know our guest, or partially why I'm so close to our guest today, is having the experience of my dad dying 2 years ago. And he died of pancreatic cancer, and so it was a long process of watching him die, the cancer process, right, of going through chemo and all of that. And I've always thought that total cliche of it made me a stronger person. It was the hardest thing I ever went through, hands down. So every time I go through something now, whether it be a breakup or a conflict or just a bad day, I'm well, I did that. And I can do anything.
Yeah. I remember, JC, because that's when I was getting to know you, and I think helped solidify our friendship as well, and just really remarking on watching you through it all, and just I don't know if I actually ever really shared with you just how impressed I was, and giving yourself the permission to go through the full range of healing, but just how you continue to move through it.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt like I really relied on you guys. So our guest is Courtney Callaway.
Hello.
And she's an LPC and RYT, so licensed professional counselor and registered yoga teacher.
Yes.
And you specialize in grief, expressive arts, adolescence, yoga, all those.
I'm also EMDR trained.
Okay, so will you spell out or say out that acronym?
Yeah, eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Okay, so that's a long
Yes.
term for like trauma therapy.
Yeah, you can use it a lot for trauma work. I specifically wanted to get into it to utilize it with grief counseling.
Yeah.
And sometimes the traumas that we experience with grief.
Yeah.
But it can be used for a wide variety of things.
And so we normally ask our guests, like, why is your topic important to you? And so, like, I know going through the death and grief of my dad who had pancreatic cancer, your dad also had pancreatic cancer. Will you tell a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so when I was 14, my dad was diagnosed, and it was also pancreatic cancer, and it was pretty aggressive. He probably fought it for about a year, but in that time frame, I started my own grief counseling, and then I did a little bit afterwards, and just found how beneficial it was, and it really sparked a passion for me to want to help others in their grief journey.
Yeah, and that's not always the case to where you can do grief counseling like while somebody's dying. So that's so cool that you got that experience, and to be able to suggest that to other people. I would never think of that.
Yeah, it's because you're experiencing a lot of anticipatory grief when it comes to things like a terminal illness.
Yeah.
Or something that's prolonged. And so we can thank my mom. Shout out for that.
Yes, good job, Mom.
Yeah, she wanted me to go see someone while he was still alive to kind of start processing some of that.
Yeah, and there's it's so cool that there's even a term for that, anticipatory grief, and starting that process before somebody dies.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing your story, and maybe you can talk a little bit more on that, like as we go through this topic of grief, and like how all this fits into like your story, or maybe some of your clients and everything.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but maybe should we, I guess, look at how you define grief?
Yeah.
Yeah, so grief, so the kind of technical definition of grief is our internal experience to a loss. And so what most people conceptualize with grief and loss is the loss of a loved one or a person. However, it's way bigger than that. You can experience grief and loss with like a job loss, a breakup, you move, even just various life transitions. So it's actually really, we come into contact with it so many times throughout our life.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about a pet dying?
Yes. That is definitely in grief and loss. And that's actually under a term called disenfranchised grief. And so that can really be an umbrella for things that society might not recognize. And so with a loss of a loved one, we kind of have set things that we do. We usually have funeral services, and there's support groups, and there's kind of societal standards of how to respond. And we have these social cues of how to kind of grieve.
How to support people through it.
Yeah, but with disenfranchised grief, a lot of times there's not that. And I also think I left out an important one. Miscarriages are often a lot in disenfranchised grief.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, that's so interesting because I've never thought of it that way. Like we do have all these like cultural norms and support areas for like this one specific aspect of grief. But in other aspects, it's just like kind of ignored.
Yeah, or it's just not recognized. And so then we sometimes don't have the cues or the steps to go forward. So grief's already confusing for a griever, let alone if it's falls under the umbrella of a loss that's not really noticed by society or validated sometimes.
Yeah.
So how do you know, I mean, this may sound like a strange question, but I'm guessing our listeners may not always be aware of what grief actually looks like and how it shows up in their life.
Yeah. So grief can manifest itself in almost all areas, physical manifestations, emotional, social, behavioral, and then we also have a lot of cognitions that come with after a loss, so more like mental. So the physical symptoms, I mean, they can range anywhere from like restlessness, loss of appetite, increase of appetite, difficulty sleeping, nightmares, and then emotional are kind of what we think of with grief, like the sadness, pain, guilt, helplessness, anxiety, and the social.
How about anger, sorry.
Oh, yes, anger's in there too. Sorry, I always miss a really important one. And then social can be, usually it's a spectrum. People either want to withdraw and avoid others, or they might become more dependent and want to be around people more. And then behaviorally, it can be forgetfulness. It can be wanting to talk about the deceased a lot, or about maybe your last moments with them, if we're looking at a loss of a loved one, or it can be not wanting to talk about the loss at all, going like the complete opposite direction.
So what's the, like, it seems like different people grieve in different ways, and it looks different for everyone. Is there like a healthier way to grieve?
Yeah, so it's hard because grief, the biggest thing, grief is super individualized and very unique. And so I always see it as a spectrum, and really you can fall anywhere in the spectrum, but the two places that are maybe a little more unhealthy or to watch out for are the two opposite ends. And so I see that as one end of stuffing your grief and suppressing it and not looking at it at all.
Not talking about
yeah,
it.
like ever.
Okay.
Like kind of in that denial stage?
Yes, but like staying there for a long time. And then the other end would be kind of really saturated in it. And that's all you can think about. It really hinders functioning. Like you can't go on to do daily tasks because you're so like plugged into it. So.
And I know you just said that it's super unique and individual. And I'm also wondering, like, for those listening and or other clinicians, when it impacts daily functioning and say somebody just like can't get out to go to work or school, like, is there somewhat of a number to look for? Like, you know, if it's been like 2 months and they haven't stepped outside the house, or
yeah, that would probably be a good. So it's interesting. I found most of my clients, if they get to take off work, sometimes they get a week of bereavement. Yeah, or if they're lucky, like 2 weeks.
Are you kidding me?
Yes, that's also some of society's, I think, message that we should be working, like the grief is something to get over in a timely manner. But yeah, a good gauge I would think is, if you're around a couple months and you're still really struggling to function, then you could probably use more support. But I do have clients that come in just right after a loss, and they just want to get the process started. And so really with grief counseling, there's no too early to do it. But yeah, if it's going on for a couple months and you really like can't get vertical, is kind of the way I like to look at it. If you can't get up out of bed,
physically can't get
physically
out of bed
vertical, then you probably need some additional support.
Sure.
Yeah.
I am sorry. Like, are you just not like kind of disgusted by the fact that like work says you should be over a loss in 2 weeks?
Yeah. I guess I don't really see it as like we should be over it, right? Like there is like some type of time construct. And like what I found for me is that like I did need to be doing things and like being that distracted. And having like somewhat of a normal life. But I do think that we have this like cultural idea that, you know, like we should be moved on. And that kind of like helps enforce that, I feel like of 1 week, you know, you should kind of be over it or kind of moving through it already.
Yeah. No, and I think the stages also get brought up a lot. I have clients that come in, and so the grief stages are something a lot of people are familiar with, or that's a term that's thrown around a lot. But the ironic thing is, so it's Kubler-Ross, and she wrote them for stages that a terminally ill person experiences when they're dying.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they're actually not intended to be stages for grievers.
Okay.
But it's just kind of morphed over time.
Yeah.
And so
does it somewhat fit grievers?
yeah, it somewhat fits because it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Okay.
However, with grievers, there's so much more in there. And so then some people have come out with like 7 stages. I like to print off, I use this activity that's kind of like a bell curve, and it really just shows a wide range of emotions and then a dip, and then kind of creating new patterns and a new sense of self and on the other side.
Yeah.
But really when I do the activity with my clients, it doesn't look like this. It goes like, because you just really
so
ping.
it doesn't look like that curve. It just is kind of more sporadic. It's not linear.
No, the moral of the story is it's not linear at all. Yeah. But I think people get in their head.
Ups and downs. And
that they want it to be linear, or they'll say, well, I thought I was out of the anger stage, but I'm back right in it. And it's that it's not linear.
Yeah, I posted on our Instagram, I don't know if you saw this, but it was a ball of grief.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
Yeah,
that one's good.
Yeah, it was so cool because it's just like layered of different experiences of like confusion, anxiety, anger, like all the different feelings. And they go, you go one way and then you go the other way and you just come back around.
And that's how, it really feels for people. It's just back and forth. It's sporadic.
It's super, it can be frustrating.
I like to describe it, excuse my French, as a shitstorm.
I love it.
So when you're really
real.
Let's be real. It's pretty much a shitstorm. But the way I approach grief counseling is you also have to know yourself and know what your grief looks like when you're in that shitstorm, and then know what tools you have in the shitstorm.
Okay.
And so a big piece for me with clients is really exploring their grief styles and their personality traits, because that really comes into play with how we grieve. That's part of why it's so unique.
Can you share a little bit?
I'm like, tell me more.
So the 2 grief styles that I learned about in grad school and kind of operate out of are intuitive grievers or instrumental grievers. And then those combined are blended grievers. And so intuitive is more of an internal experience with your emotions. It's kind of what it sounds like, intuitive, like you're intuitive with your feelings. And so these grievers are going to express more affect and be more in tune with their affect. And so it might look more typical of crying or emoting and kind of what we typically think of like, oh, that person's grieving over there.
Yeah.
However,
they're in their feels.
Yes. And then there's instrumental, which is another way that people try to experience their grief. And it's cognitive, it's more problem-solving approach, and it's also more behavioral. So they might be doing more things to tap into their grief.
Okay. And then like personality-wise too, I'm curious, would you see those as typically more avoidant of emotions? And so they're going to be the type that, okay, I just need to get this done.
Yes.
Like I need to get back to my daily routine.
Yes. Yeah. And so, but really there's not one that's better than the other. And the best approach is to blend both of those. But I'll talk with my clients, which one do you think you naturally already are? And then, okay, so we know you're strong in that area, and so maybe we'll focus more on intuitive, or maybe we need to focus more on problem solving and more behavioral things you can do. Because the idea is to get to a blended place.
Sure.
And then I also look at, with my clients, a lot of meanings. And so that's very unique, because with grief, it's acknowledging your feelings and then trying to integrate the loss. And the way we do that is look at the meaning that we are making from the loss.
Sure. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it's kind of a hard topic to explain because it's pretty abstract.
Like really deep.
Yes, it's extremely deep. I break it down into meaning of self, others, and the world. And so like if we'll look at it from the standpoint of a lost loved one per se. So that's going to be extremely devastating, and it's going to shift your worldview.
Can you use your experience as an example?
Yeah. And so I guess, when my dad died when I was 14, I was more in a place of a lot of guilt. And so the meaning of myself was I'm not a good person for the way I handled it.
Yeah.
And the meaning of others, I got to remember, it was probably that no one understood at the time. That was probably the meaning.
Definitely see that as 14 and just your dad dying in general.
And then I think the meaning for the world was kind of that it was unsafe or bad things happen. And so over time, it's been 15 years now, my meanings have vastly changed. However, there was a time period where I was attached to those meanings and probably internalized them. And so that led to various probably unhealthy coping skills. But with my clients, what I look at with that is you want to honor where you're at. You don't want to try to reframe grief. Okay. So it's not about let's have a positive meaning if that's not where you're at.
Rainbows and unicorns, go.
Yeah.
Right, like it was all for the best.
Yeah.
It's probably not something that you should say to someone.
Yes,
right.
no.
And we'll get to more of those, right?
Yes, and so you honor where you're at, but in that you can look at your current meanings and see, well, I kind of want that one to change over time. You know, the one where I was internalizing, I didn't handle this well, or I'm not a good daughter, I knew I don't want to operate out of that for the rest of my life. And so it takes sitting with it and acknowledging feelings and processing to get to a different meaning.
Yeah, that takes so much to have that awareness of like, okay, I'm feeling guilty, and that's coming from, like, I know your experience a little bit was like you were 14, so you didn't know how to handle your dad dying, and the relationship was a little like broken in a way.
Yeah,
and
just
so,
rocky with teen years.
Yeah. And so like having that experience and just having awareness of it, like that's really tough work to be able to see that as something. And so how did you change that, and what did that meaning change to?
So I changed it. I mean, it wasn't right away. I think there were several
15 years of work.
Yeah,
Like,
this is like
a step-by-step instruction.
Yeah, this is
please.
a 15-year thing, and it's still in the works.
Yeah,
we're still working on it.
It's like you dip back and forth.
Yeah,
as do I.
Yeah, you'll kind of vacillate back to old feelings or sometimes patterns. But doing counseling again at different points in my life, becoming more involved in the field too, and learning like, oh, okay, this is how I'm internalizing this. Could I move towards a different place? And for me, it was a lot of, I needed to forgive myself and then a little bit of forgiveness of him as well. And so it really
that's
just
so beautiful.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. I feel like that's what a lot of people probably experience too.
Sure. And I don't know, I just may be drawing an inference. It seems to me that especially in loss, there's a tendency to blame because the situation is so out of control. So, if I could have done something different, if I would have been better about it, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Is that like a misguided belief that you see clients needing to work through?
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of clients will get stuck in that pattern, and they'll continue to have the what ifs, and I should have done this and I should have done that. And that's a pretty normal reaction. We just want to, and we'll honor that. But then we get to a point where we can also add in a new meaning or move forward with it. But all of this to say is you can't change your meanings unless you're like aware of them.
Right.
So the biggest,
that's the starting place.
Yeah. So the biggest piece with my clients is I want us to take a curiosity approach to their grief and really explore what your grief is like for you, what cognitions we have in there, meanings, how you express it. And then from that, we can then move forward.
Yeah.
Like you have to kind of have awareness of self.
Yeah. And like you said, with curiosity, I think of like being that mindfulness perspective of non-judgmental towards yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you're feeling guilty and like blaming yourself or other people, like you can't really see things clearly.
Yeah.
So to kind of be compassionate and just see it for what it is versus like judging and.
Yeah.
So no wrong way to feel, no wrong way to grieve, right? We're all in agreement about that. And simultaneously, it sounds like there are ways to better cope and move through and approach the healing process, right? And you've talked a lot about, because you're such a skilled therapist and the emotional work. But I'm wondering on a practical level, do you have any tips, that you share with clients?
Yeah. So I almost always recommend grief journaling for my clients.
And grief counseling.
And grief counseling.
Specifically with Courtney Callaway.
Specifically with me, no. Journaling, I think, is a great avenue. And even for my clients that don't, they'll approach it like, I'm not about to Dear Diary this. And I'm like, no, it doesn't have to be long. It can even just be where you're feeling emotionally or just a thought you're having. That's a big one. And then I kind of come up with a list. With my clients, we also do an activity of triggers, and then we also do an activity of what are ways they could tap into their grief. So if I'm pursuing it from a place of a loved one, we might write a long list of things that remind them of them, that they associate with them. It could even be things like going to a trail that you used to always walk with them, or listening to said music. And we come up with this long list of how they can tap into their grief. Maybe it's looking at photos. I mean, it can get also just very specific to the person. And then I approach it as, we've got to tap in. So my approach is, you tap in and you tap out. So grief feels really out of control, and it can feel even more out of control if you stuff it or suppress it, because then it'll come out in other ways, or sometimes it'll just smack you in the face. You'll get a grief attack.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. That reminds me of like my own grieving process. And I know that you wanted me to speak a little bit. So here I am speaking about the disenfranchised grief, or just not as concrete loss, but breakups. And I remember, associating a song with somebody that I'd been involved with, that I would hear it and I would just like turn it off. Like, no, I cannot listen to this.
Yep.
It's so overwhelming. And then, as time progressed, I would hear the song and it wouldn't have as much of an effect on me.
Yeah.
So that sounds like what you do with clients. Encourage them to like move towards allow the emotions
move
to
towards
happen.
the feelings, and in a way that feels comfortable to them. So that's why we come up with a very specialized list. And I'll just kind of ask, how are you tapping in, or did you tap in throughout the week, or if I haven't seen them in a while, in the past month. And the tapping in and tapping out can give more of a sense of control, because it's also on the client's terms. Like, I am going to sit down, because it's already all like right here sometimes, and so
below the chin.
right below the surface, and so it can feel more empowering to sit down and look at it, because it's there, versus just kind of putting it in the corner.
Yeah. How do you sell? I mean, I use the word sell, but work with clients to realize the importance of moving towards those uncomfortable emotions and tapping into the triggers.
So it's sometimes it's a conversation that's ongoing. I do use a metaphor. I can't remember where I got it from. I did not make it though. It was it's about a baby, and I explain how when babies are in pain or crying out, we take them closer and we hold them, and that's what self-soothes. We don't throw the baby, we don't put the baby in the corner or stuff it somewhere. You bring the baby in close, because that's what's going to self-soothe. And it's the same thing with pain. We need to bring our pain in close so that we can actually feel it, soothe it, and integrate it, or it's just going to keep crying.
Really take care of it.
Yeah. And honor it. Yeah.
Thank you. Because I know, and JC, maybe you encounter this too with clients that are avoidant, and I get it, because I can be avoidant too, right? Of like feeling it to heal it.
Yeah.
Right? But that's such a beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
Of like comforting, embracing, and especially the reminder you can do it a little bit at a time.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be, because that's kind of the spectrum again of, if you're tapped in 24/7 to your grief, you'll get zapped, is what I like to say, and it's just too much. But if you're over here and you're never tapping in, then that can lead to other things as well. So we want to, like, through the spectrum, tap in and tap out.
Yeah.
At various times.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Can you say a little bit more about the journaling to go back? And, I guess, sorry, I may be getting too technical about like how frequent that may be helpful for clients to do.
Yeah, so I have my clients usually start out weekly journaling, and so I don't say that it has to be every day, but just if I'm seeing you weekly, and if they feel comfortable bringing in that journal and us processing it. And I have some clients that enjoy prompts, and there are a lot of grief journals out there that will give you prompts, but I'm also an advocate for, it's really just externalizing what you're going through. So I have some clients that might just write, anger that day, and that's it, or they just might scribble across the page, or they might write some of those thoughts that you had mentioned earlier of what ifs, or I could have done this, or if I would have done this, and really I try to prescribe it weekly, and then after that, kind of just whenever they get hit with a grief attack.
Yeah.
Is kind of
yeah,
my
I
approach.
like what you said. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, you don't have to have proper sentences or spelling, or
it can just be one word. It can be a couple words together. Because I think sometimes it can feel very daunting one, grief in general, and then two, to sit down and write about it.
Yeah.
So
to spend time with him.
Yeah. And so even if it's just a sporadic thought or feeling here or there, that's still you trying to externalize and get it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I remember whenever my dad passed away and you bought me a grief journal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was super helpful for me, being able to, like I wrote letters to him. And so
Yes, that's a prompt that a lot of people like too.
yeah. And it just helped me feel connected and
Yeah.
like he was still there.
Yeah, and that goes to, I don't know if we've mentioned the continuing the bond.
Yeah, no, talk about that.
That's another approach I take with clients, specifically in the realm of a lost loved one, is that we only grieve what we love. And like the flip side of grief is love. And so with a loved one, you're going to love them for the rest of your life. So you're going to grieve for them for the rest of your life. And in that, so I want to...
You mean it doesn't go away right when they die?
Yeah, no. Oh, and it doesn't go away in 2 weeks when you have to go back to work.
Or a couple years.
Yeah, no, it will be lifelong. And usually when I tell my clients that, they're like,
Oh my gosh.
they're like, okay.
Never going to get over it.
Yes, but it will feel differently.
I feel like whenever I really understood like what you mean by that, it was almost comforting to me that I can have that connection with my dad for the rest of my life.
Yeah. It'll just look different.
Yeah.
So we take that energy that was once in that relationship when he was here, and we have to get creative and kind of transfer it into other things.
Yeah.
But I think it's one of the better approaches to try to continue that relationship. And
I feel like you're so good at it. Like you remind me to do that. Will you talk a little bit about ways that you continue the bond
yeah.
with your dad?
Yeah, there's I have a chest. So I have a chest full of his things. It was a chest that he had in his room. And so it's a random collection. I have like a blanket, various hats, pictures, items that were on his desk. So, and I also have a photo album and I actually have all of his yearbooks. I recently acquired, I think from like 7th grade to 12th grade.
Oh my gosh. Do you have like your favorite photos of him?
Yeah.
This?
And it's just so funny to look through them. So I'll do things like that. That's kind of tapping in for me, is sometimes looking through those things. Or I like to do pancreatic awareness events, like the pancreatic or the run that's coming up next Saturday. Or I'll still journal or post about him, or I like to go to the gravesite and have chats.
Graveside chats.
Yes, gravesite chats. And so
I like how that you have this one photo where you have a Topo Chico and then you brought one for him too. It just feels special.
Yeah. I'll talk, or ever so often I'll talk to him, or there's certain songs too that I like to listen to, or songs that were played at his funeral that sometimes I'll turn on. And I agree with you. I see it too. There's some comfort in it too, knowing I will always have this relationship with him.
Yeah.
It looks different, but
for sure. One of the ones that I do, I have a lot of the similar ones too, and I have some voicemails from my dad, and they're just like little, I'm going to cry.
Okay.
They're just,
yeah. It's okay.
Cry and laugh at the same time. Yeah. They're just simple little hey, thinking about you today, nothing long or, anything. And then this one's kind of funny because I called and told my brother this the other day. I said, I was listening to Dad's funeral the other day because it just, it's stories, his friends talking. The pastor knew him really well. It's funny.
Yeah.
And my brother was like, don't tell people that. That's weird. You're listening to his funeral.
Yeah.
It's it provides me a way to connect with him.
Right. Because funerals can be a celebration of life, or this whole grieving process seems to me that it's honoring and being able to give yourself permission to talk about all aspects of it. Right. And the chance to really share fun memories, funny stories. So watch the funeral if you want.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julia. Sorry, Jackson.
Watch it whenever you want.
Yeah.
But I'll watch it. Do you want to come over tonight and we can all watch my dad's funeral? I will.
Yeah. That's an interesting party. No, but it is, and it's also being okay with that and knowing it looks so different for every person. And so I'll have clients sometimes that will share things like that, and they're like, I'm so weird. And I'm like, no, you're not. Like, that's unique to you. And if that's helpful, then go for it.
Yeah. So you've talked a lot about what's helpful, and I know our listeners and a lot of supporters would like to know what is helpful to say and what is not helpful to say.
Yeah, say or do.
Yes. Okay. So I'll preface again that it's super unique for every individual. But some of the I'll start with the do's. Okay. So one of the biggest do's for significant others or friends, maybe, if it's someone grieving, is to be there. So that's checking in. That can be a text message, that can be a phone call, and it's also checking in relatively, if you can, consistently. And something that I know you and I have talked about is it's always so meaningful and so sweet when I get text messages on like anniversary days or big days, or if someone in my support system remembers.
For sure.
I think sometimes people on the outside don't know what to say, and then they also fear they'll offend maybe or say the wrong thing, so then they don't say anything at all. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but that feels more isolating.
Yeah. Well, and it also feels like whenever my dad was dying, it was like a big deal to everybody around me and really important to all of us. Like we were kind of felt like we were all going through it. So I'm a couple years in, you're 15 years in, so probably experienced this a little bit more. But sometimes it feels like people forgot or like it's not as important to them, but it's still like so prevalent in my life.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's why that's the number one do, is to continue to reach out to people that are grieving, because it doesn't just end, 2 years from now or 5 years from now.
Yeah. And we talked about like how people, like we have those friends that remember birthdays and whatnot.
Yeah.
So even, like keeping that in your phone for people that lost someone or too.
And do you ever, I don't know, for supporters, like, would it be okay for us to ask, like, hey, can you remind us when these these dates are? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah. So the other things on the do's were to, be there, reach out consistently, and really focus on the griever's experience. And so this kind of correlates to a don't on my list, but when you're checking in, like, hey, I know today's a hard day, thinking about you, let me know if you need anything, and really keeping it on the griever. And so I say that because another end on the don't side is sometimes unsolicited advice comes through. And depending on where you're at in your grief journey, it can just be very irritating, to put it in lamest terms. Or another don't is comparing. I find that a lot where my clients will report, and it's always someone with the best intentions, but they'll come in saying, I know exactly what you're going through. I lost my grandmother. And maybe it's a person who's lost a parent or a spouse. And it's always well-intended, but the focus should be, unless they ask you for specifics, keep the focus on the griever. Reflecting, feeling, how they're doing, anything they need. These are like just general rules that are great to follow.
Okay.
Oh, and stay away from cliches. That's the other thing.
Yes. Can you name all the cliches?
I can't name all of them.
Let's work together.
Please.
Yeah. Okay.
At least they're not in pain anymore.
Yes. This was part of a greater plan. Sometimes can be frustrating.
They're in a better place now.
Well, at least you had 14 years.
Oh, that's seriously?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man, yeah. I don't know. I remember having this conversation with you a lot, Court. Is I would get so mad whatever anyone said to me.
Yeah.
Like if somebody asked me how my dad was doing, like before he died, or like how I was doing, I'd be like, well, not good, And then we talked about how like you or other people may want people to ask. So that's when it's really helpful to ask like, what do you need?
Yes.
How can I be there for you?
Yeah. Just checking in more so. Cause the how are you? I've gotten so many mixed reviews on that, because some people want that, and then some grievers are like, how the heck do you think I am?
Right.
Like exactly what you
which
said.
makes it hard for the supporters to know what to do. And so
Exactly.
maybe another, I guess, guideline for supporters is to not take the reaction personally.
Yes, that's actually, on my don't list is, do list is give grace to grievers. Because they're on a roller coaster.
I wish you would have known that 2 years ago for myself.
Yeah, they're on a roller coaster. Give grace to yourself, and if you're watching someone go through something, because they're going to be irritable. They're going to have a short fuse. They're raw and vulnerable.
Well, and the thing's so overwhelmed, so it might not always be easy to express or communicate what you do need.
Yes.
And it may change from day to day. Right. So I think the supporters need to know that to be flexible and to adjust and to give grace.
Yeah. Extremely. Oh, and the other thing that I hear a lot about that I wanted to add for the don'ts, just real quick, is, and I don't know if I experienced a lot of this, and it might have been due to my age when it happened, and it's coming from a sweet place, but when people treat you very fragile and they almost are kind of like timid in their reactions and are very like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But it's like this look that sometimes can be felt as pity to the griever. And sometimes it's like, I want you to check in, but you don't have to wear kid gloves all the time. Yeah. Like kind of treat me normally too.
Yeah,
for sure.
And I think a lot of, and we as counselors know this, but supporters' reactions stem from the challenge of being able to hold emotion in other people's. And so to know that too, it's not, as a supporter, it's not your necessary role to be able to handle it right.
Or resolve it and fix it, because I think for me why I would get so irritated at people is because I couldn't fix the pain and other people can't fix the pain. So that was just how I felt. And what I really needed was exactly what you said on the do's, was just people to be there. And I remember one of my Whitney, our fellow San Antonio podcaster, she just cried with me one time, and that was the most meaningful experience that I had, and that's what I needed. Was just to feel
silence
my pain
and presence.
Yes. And somebody to just be there in it with me.
No, that's number one. On the list.
Yeah. Well, do you remember any important experiences for you that was helpful or?
So, speaking a little bit on developmentally, so grief does look different with whatever developmental stage we're in. So children's, teens, adults. So I was a teenager when it happened. And so I think what can be typical of teens is to not want to talk about it with other adults. Peers are huge. And I vacillated between only wanting to talk about it with peers to then also not wanting to talk about it at all. Because the other flip side, when you're a teenager and you experience the significant losses, you feel like no one can relate. And you don't want to be singled out, because it's also just a time where you're trying to blend in with everyone.
Conform.
Conform.
You don't want to be different.
And so I appreciated, though, my friends at the time, they would check in with me, but then I also needed a lot of space. And that's true to this day. When I'm heavy in my grief, I usually I withdraw a little more. And so I do appreciate someone reaching out or offering their support, but then I really appreciate space when I'm in that place with my grief.
Yeah.
But I also remember I had coaches that made posters for me, and they all wrote cards during my dad's sickness. It was so sweet.
Yeah.
So support.
That's amazing.
Too.
Yeah. Just being there, and for supporters to be a little uncomfortable, even if they don't know what to say or do.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, Julian, just the ability to be there and hold that discomfort a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to go to our Let's Chat section, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about disenfranchised grief.
Yeah.
So let's chat. Question from our listener, Julian.
I'm wait, did I submit this question? No.
I'm what?
Have I thought of this question myself? Yes. Can I relate to it? Absolutely. So thank you to our listener who I think it's a really valid question of, is it normal to ever think and miss my ex? And will I ever get over it?
That's a good one.
I promise this is from a listener.
Julianne. So
I promise.
There's this girl I heard she was struggling with. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, also validating I've had the same question, but it's from a listener.
So the question, it started with, is it okay to miss an ex?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, completely. Yeah. And then what was the second part to it?
Do I ever fully get over an ex?
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. I would challenge that listener to maybe sit with the meaning she made about the relationship, and maybe the meaning she's made about herself, and then see where we're kind of working with that.
Because it's interesting, right? Because we talk about like losing like the death of somebody that we could potentially like always grieve them, but the loss of a relationship, I feel like with healthy grieving, like it might be normal for it to come up on a regular basis, but I don't think it's as like devastating eventually if you grieve healthy in a healthy way.
Healthily, is that a word?
It's a word. Yes.
You just made it one.
But yeah, it is under that umbrella of disenfranchised grief, and so it is going to be
How
a little
is
more
that
confusing.
processed for people in a...
I really don't have a model for it.
Yeah.
It's a lot of just conversations and a lot of the cognitions you have about it. And I always am going back to the meaning, but that's how I associate it. So we'll look at the relationship and kind of what it meant to them and feelings around it. And then from there, look at the meanings we've made. Because I'd be curious why she feels like she can't move on, or what's been keeping her stuck in that grief.
And maybe like an example of a meaning might be like, I found the one, or
this was my only chance at love.
I'll never find anyone else.
Like he's the one that got me, like the only one I connected with. Those are some things that I've heard like clients say. And two, I'm thinking on a quote, I'm putting in air quotes, smaller scale, but I'm talking about or I've heard a lot recently with my clients too, of this ghosting phenomenon, but where they've had some sort of connection, and or started dating or whatnot, and then somebody like falls off and there's never any closure. And that's what we're talking about here, right? Like with
there's definitely
disenfranchised
an element
like,
of
and
it.
how do you make sense of that, right?
Yeah.
And that just seems like it's hard to navigate.
Yes. It is.
Sometimes I think of like closure, I feel like a lot of people say they need closure in breakups. And I feel like it can mean more what you say, Courtney, of like making meaning out of it and kind of seeing your future, like integrating it into your future without this person. Like you might not need actual closure with the person, but it's almost like with yourself.
Yeah.
Well, and I've done this before, like with an ex where I felt like I didn't get closure, where I wrote a letter, just like you did. And I kept it and thought about, okay, this is what I needed to say.
Exactly.
And get a chance to. That helps create.
Yeah, and that's a grief exercise.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So to your listener, excellent question. No, you don't have to be over it.
Yeah.
Look at what that relationship meant to you. Anything else?
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's what I would recommend.
Yeah. What would the like integrating it into your future look like without a person?
Yeah, that one's pretty hard. With my clients that I'm in particular thinking, I've even had clients that have relationships with people and then, due to ghosting or maybe an estranged family member just doesn't want anything to do with them anymore. And it's this grieving when what the loss is still alive and living that's so confusing. But I lost my train of thought where I was going with that. What was the original question?
I guess because you talked a little bit about like having the awareness of grief, like accepting it, making meaning out of it, and then seems like the next stage and process is like kind of making meaning out of your future without that person. So I'm just curious what that looks like maybe focusing more on yourself, like what you do want in a future partner.
Yeah.
No,
like
it's
I
all of
learned that I
those.
want a future partner that is going to like talk about hard things instead of just run away.
Okay.
Right. So
Yeah.
I guess that's the meaning that I made.
Yeah, and that would be the
it's that
meaning.
example of, okay, well, I learned from this what I appreciated and what I don't want and what I do need.
Yeah, you can learn your values from it. Yeah, what you want moving forward.
Yeah.
Like what was helpful for you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
Jeez. You help me drink.
Okay, so do you have any helpful books or resources for people if they are going through grief?
Yeah, the main book I recommend is Grieving Mindfully.
Okay.
I enjoy this book because it encompasses a lot of mindfulness with grief, and it takes an approach that's very intentional.
Okay.
Which that is my approach with grief as well. Is let's acknowledge it. Let's be intentional with it. That's part of the tapping in and the tapping out. Yeah. And I enjoy that because it also gets you moving in your body. There's breathing exercises and movement like that, which I also think is great.
You don't have to like think about it the whole
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
You can, yeah.
And then this one I've only brought, I don't necessarily recommend this grief journal per se, but it was just to bring the example of grief journaling is super helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this website that whenever I'm working with clients with grief or going through my own stuff and want to just read about it, and I forget what the name of it is. It's like whatisgrief.org or something.
Oh,
like that. You
yeah.
know
I
what I'm
think
talking
I've been
about?
on that website. Yeah.
I'll list it in our show notes along
Okay.
with these books, but I just wanted to see if you probably know all the information already, so we don't really need to look at it.
Yeah.
But it's helpful for me. Is there any last thing that you want to share with our listeners that you think would be helpful?
No, I'm trying to think. Reiterating the quote that was posted earlier, grief really does come in waves. And so knowing that and giving yourself grace that sometimes you're not always going to be on the boat. So I always like to tell clients, sometimes we're on a boat in the waves, sometimes we're on a raft, and sometimes we're in the water. And so we really want to come up with life preservers for when you're in the water, in all scenarios. And just honor where you're at and give yourself grace and know that it's normal. Grief is a normal
Human experience.
Yes, a normal response. It's not something to feel ashamed about, and it's something to really sit with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You are an expert and have so much to share and learn from. And where can others find you?
Oh, let's see. People can find me on Psychology Today at Courtney Callaway, or you can find me on wefixbrains.com. That is the private practice, or the website for the private practice I work for, the LifeWorks group.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And you've been pivotal in helping me through my own grief, and have heard what you're doing with clients. And I know that you're helping a lot of people. So I appreciate you being on the pod and sharing all of your knowledge and everything.
Yeah. Grief's my favorite. I'm super passionate about it. And I always, I feel honored and privileged with every client that lets me walk with them in their grief journey.
You're a special lady.
So thank you guys so much for listening. Again, you can find us at whiterockcounseling.com, everydaytherapypodcast.com, and please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. We would love you for it. Thank you. Bye. See you guys next week. God, I was like, miss.